Okay, so we're going to do a fun little sundress today. Very 70s, very vintage. I think that I had something very similar to this in the 70s. But what I'm going to be doing is kind of like this view A. I like those sleeves, but I'm not going to make it full length. I'm going to make it more like this length. Just for fun. Honestly, just for fun. I just saw it and it brought back memories. I said, you know what, that's cute. And I have this fabric. Actually, I had two fabrics. One was a gauze that I thought, oh, that'll be perfect for it. But I got it home and I realized I really didn't like the color. So I threw it in the wash with some dye and did my thing. And the color came out even worse than before. So I have this like putrid green color gauze in my closet now that I'll figure something out to do with later. But I've got this peach and it's polyester. But honestly, nothing says 70s sundress like polyester, you know. So I'm going to make it out of peach. It's like a crepe, you know, should be easy to wash. And if I feel like it, I have a coordinating sheer version of the same color that I can do the sleeves out of. And it has a place for lace, you know, which we love lace. And I don't know, I'm just in the mood to do something fun and cute. And I figure, why not? Why not? So I'm going to go ahead and cut out these pieces. It looks very straightforward. And we'll get started. Alrighty, so the first thing we're going to deal with are pieces 1, 2, and 3, the front bands. Now I am using lace for my contrast. So you cut two pieces, one in your regular fabric and one in the contrast. And I'm going to need to make all of these markings. So there are circles to punch. So as always, I'm getting my handy dandy little tool, my screw type leather hole punch. If you're ever Googling it, that's what it is. And I need to mark the pieces, and I'm going to be using a heat erasable pen, and I need to mark all of these pieces the same way and clip my notches. Okay, so we're going to be constructing two different square type things, one with the contrast and one with the regular fabric. Let me move you up a bit here. So I'm just going to set these side by side so I can keep track of them. Excuse me. Piece number 2. And my little notches, I'm going to actually draw over where I notched just so we can see them clearer. And these are going to be pinned up here. Okay, so the little squared offy parts are towards the outside. So we're matching the notches. And what you're going to be doing is sewing from the outside edge. And the outside edge on this piece is, if you follow the line, it comes to a point. That point is the stitching line. And when you're sewing these, you come in to this center-ish dot, but you don't go beyond it. So when you're stitching, just go to that point of this dot right here. All right, so I'm just doing one set of seams at a time, and this one that I'm doing here is the back band to the shoulder band pieces. And this is pretty self-explanatory. You just go from this little point out here through the dot all the way. When you get to the center one, reinforce it and stop. You want to make sure that you have a little opening here. Now, the thing is, if you're doing the lace, which why wouldn't you, lace can be kind of tricky if you're just feeding it itself through the machine. And I want to show you what I'm going to be doing, because the last thing I want is for my lace to get chewed up in a feed dogs. Get a piece of tissue paper. You've got plenty in your trash can from when you cut up the pattern. And what I do is I'm just going to cut enough that I can sandwich my seam in the middle. And actually, I'm going to pull these pins out sandwich my seam in there and put them back, and I can still see my circle, okay? But when I feed this through the machine, it's going to feed through really nice, really slick. I can control it easily. Nothing's going to get gummed up or chewed up. And then you can just rip it off when you're done. If you feel like you can't see that and you want to just make sure, there is absolutely nothing wrong with redrawing your line just so you can see it, you know. Whoops, sorry about that. Pretend I'm drawing this straight, okay? There's nothing wrong with drawing on that tissue paper because you're just going to rip it off anyway. So just wanted to show you I am sewing over my tissue paper. So I'm starting at the outside edge, coming through this first dot, and I am eyeballing my second dot, which is right here, aiming straight at that, right here. Gonna do a little reinforcing and pull it out. So now all I have to do is pull this tissue paper off. And that seam is nice. I'm using actually a very light pink thread because that'll match the peach pretty well when I put it over it. But there you go. That's a fabulous way to sew on lace when you have nothing else with it. So now this is the part we just did, and now we're going to pin the other part, which is the front band, another one of these pieces, to the front. It's the same thing where we're going to go from the outside edge all the way up to the little dot here, but stopping at the dot so that there's an opening. Okay, so with all of our seams in our funky little square here done, what I need to do now is come back and trim this seam. Doesn't say exactly, but I'm going to trim it to about 1/4 inch just down each side, and I'm going to do the same thing with the lace, just to trim it to about 1/4 inch, and then come back and press these seams open, this one and the lace. So what I would do, especially this piece, it wants to curve, so I'm using my little seam roll because that way I can get a better angle on it. So I just press it open slightly, and I'm just using the tip of my iron. You can see I have some steam going here. Do love my steam. And that's going to press it nicely, just using the very tip. Now I can come down, but I don't want to hold that very long on top, just because lace can get stretched out of shape so easily. So just be very careful. So the next thing you're going to do is put the right sides together, so your seam allowances are on the outside of both. Match them up. And I'm going to, pin everything, making sure that my seam allowances stay nicely stacked on top of each other. And what you're going to do is come back in here and sew all the way around at a 5/8 inch allowance, and pivot it. When you get to the seam allowance, pivot it. And that's why we left these open, so that when you're going to turn it, everything's going to open up nice and easy. Alright, I just wanted to show you, this is the inside, and this is my row of stitching along here. And if you can see, I have a little bit of puckering here, nothing too terrible, but to me that indicates I may want to change my needle. So before I sew something else, I'm going to scale it down. There's an 11 in there now. I'll probably put it down to a 9 just to deal with this stuff a little easier. Now when you're sewing 2 layers and one of them is lace, it could help you to have something, like on this side I have my little pointy awl kind of thing, so that when the presser foot's coming up here, just to try to work this side in as you go, kind of like that. That way, because lace wants to stretch out of place really easy, and that'll just help you as you go, so that when you get to your corner, everything's still going to line up well. So with that done, the next thing I need to do is trim this, and we're going to trim it down to, again, about 1/4 inch. I'm not grading it because it's just a lace layer and a polyester layer. Just ignore my finger, okay? Just ignore that right now. But anyway, I'm just trimming it like this, and that way when you open it up you can have a nice seam. When you get to your corner, before you trim it, double check and make sure that everything's lining up well, because remember we were only sewing to a dot, and that dot, it's open above it. So if you're going to need to fix anything on this corner, you know, if you need to pick out a seam and fix it before you trim it. Okay, so anyway, I'm going to go ahead and finish trimming this and put on a new band-aid so my finger's not so ugly. So at this point, they're just telling you to turn it right side out and press it and baste the edges. They are not telling you to understitch it, and they are not telling you to stabilize this neckline in any way. And what I would do is, because this fabric here is acting kind of like the inside facing at this point, with a thread that's going to blend, push the whole facing towards it and stitch it. You know what? Forget what they say. I'm going to go ahead and do that right now, because it's going to make the next step very, very a smoother step for me. So I'm going to go ahead and understitch this. Again, I am pressing these seam allowances towards the fabric. I'm not going to press it with the iron. I'm just going to hold it and run my sewing machine straight stitch down about 1/8 of an inch in on that side. I'll be right back. So I'm going to go ahead and change my machine needle, and if you've never seen one of these, I think I've mentioned them before, they are needle threaders, but they've got this great little thing at the end of them that you can use when you're putting on your sewing machine needle, where see one side is flat, that way you can line your needle up and just hold it in there and you don't have to worry about it turning. So I am just, as I'm sewing, nice and slowly, folding everything over so it's going to stay nice and flat. Okay, so here is my finished edge. This here is my understitching line, and you can see it's just inside there. And you may say, oh, that's a lot of extra work, and yeah, it is extra work, but at this point then I can just fold this lace point down, and this is going to hold nice. My lace, I can just kind of lay it as is and press it. I don't have to fidget with trying to line up that seam right at the very edge. And I think it's going to give it a nicer look. All right, so I have pressed it and then come back and run a row of stitching. I did it at about 3/8 of an inch all the way around just to keep it in place. And I can tell you one thing, the front of this looks a lot like the side, which looks a lot like the back. So make sure you mark which is which. I am actually right now going to go ahead and sew one of my labels into the back of this thing, just so at a glance I know what it is and I don't have to guess, because that's going to save me time. So, okay, so with that done, I'm going to go ahead and serge around the edges of this square before we attach it to the next piece. What I'm going to do is actually skip to step 5 and then go back to step 4, because I'm going to be doing things slightly different than the instructions, of course. And so what I'm going to do is first put together this midriff lace piece. And it's similar to what we did to this up here, where you're going to layer the lace over your real fashion fabric. So there's no corners to turn or anything. I just need to baste. So I'm going to press it so it can kind of want to start to hold. And then I'm going to baste it around the edges to make sure that I have it nice and secure. And then I'm going to serge it. So now I have this piece serged around the edges, so it's the 2 layers together. And I've gone back and with my heat erasable pen, I have marked where my little notches are, and I've also marked the center top and the center bottom of this piece. Now I'm going to take my piece number 4 and I will serge around the whole thing and then come back and transfer my marks over. All right, so now we have this middle piece here, which is the number 4, and it is going to be gathered on both sides. So it's going to fit between these two pieces, okay? And you can tell which is which because of how the notches are. There's singles here and there's doubles here. So, you know, there's several different ways to gather. I'm going to do the old school way and run 2 rows of long gathering basting stitches along each edge. So I've run my 2 rows of stitching here for my gathers, and some people don't want to run 2 rows. They only want to run a single row, and they say, do I have to run 2 rows? And no, of course you don't have to do anything. It's your project. You can do it however you want. I run 2 rows because, in my experience, the small amount of extra time it takes to put that second row of stitching in is very small compared to the extra time you're going to have to take while you're gathering up, lining everything up. Because when you have only 1 row of stitching, it doesn't lay as flat. It gets a lot more wonky. Plus, if one of your threads break, you're just kind of messed up and have to start all over again. If you have 2 rows of threads and one of them breaks, well, that's not a big deal. You've got a backup. So that's my 2 cents on that. I stopped my stitches at the point of my seam allowance, which is on this side is where the dot is, so 5/8 inch in. And since I put a mark on both my top neck piece and this piece at center front, I can match that. Now, I've mentioned before, when I'm doing gathering stitches, I have a bobbin that has very strong thread in it, and I put that in because I pull my bobbin threads when I gather. They just gather a lot easier. And also, having a special bobbin in when you gather, it's easy to tell which threads to pull. So when you're doing 2 rows of threads, you can see it's going to want to line them up better. So everything's going to want to go more correct. So anyhow, I'm going to go ahead and gather and pin this top and then this bottom here also. So this is going to have like a shirred type effect to it. So I gathered one side and pinned and sewed it on, and now I'm working on the second side. So you got a nice little gathering effect. We are going to be pressing this and everything, so that'll be better. But just doing one side at a time, it makes life a lot easier. When you're doing this bottom part, there is a lot more fullness between the notches and the center than there is between the notches and the side. And I am supposing that's just because that's where your boobs are, that's where it needs the most fullness, not here. So make sure you match your notches, otherwise it's not going to be distributed the way that the designer wanted. So I want you to see this so far. I can tell, I have this dark colored bra on my dress form down here. And I can tell that my fabric is sheer enough that if I'm wearing this dark colored bra, I'd be able to see it through there. And if I'm wearing a bright white one, hang on a second, let me get white. This is dirty white, but still, if I'm wearing a white bra, I'll be able to see that too. So I either have to choose to only wear a flesh colored bra with this or to line this center part. And if I'm going to do that, right now is the time. So the next part I'm going to deal with is this piece number 6. It's the lower front. So I'm going to put my notches up here, take the pattern paper off, and go ahead and serge around the whole thing. It's just one big piece that's cut on a fold. So I'll serge around the whole thing. And up here at the top, again, run my 2 rows of basting gathering stitches. Hello. So I have decided that I need to line this thing because at first I was just going to deal with that whole little top part because, you know, you can. But then I laid out my first skirt piece on my cutting board and I can see a whole lot through that. And then I was thinking, well, why don't I just wear a slip with it? And who wants to wear a slip with a sundress? So, as always, I'm going to make it a little more complicated, and I am going to line that top part, and I'm going to line the skirts, and I'm going to do it in a couple different ways. So, before I go on with the skirt anymore, I'm going to back up a little bit and line that top shirred piece, bust piece. And what I'm going to be using is I have some poly cotton broadcloth. It shouldn't shrink, you know, it should be nice. I wanted to make sure nothing that I put with a polyester fabric is going to shrink. So this is what I'm going to use. And yeah, I'm going to cut out that piece number 4, this upper front piece. I'm going to cut out in my white broadcloth. So anyway, yeah, plan B. All right, so this is my first seam. This is the one up by the neckline one. And instead of gathering it, I've just kind of spaced out pins where all of the E's should be. You know, where you start with a pin on each side and one in the middle. Then you split the difference and put one in the middle, split it, put one in the middle. Keep doing that until you have like slight puckers. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sew this. This part, it's going to be underneath, so it's not going to be seen. So I have my insides tucked inside, and this shirred side I'm just putting face down, and I'm pinning the bottom part of my new bodice lining to the seam allowance up here. So I'm just doing that same thing where I kind of find the halfway points, and I'm going to pin it and space all of that out. And once I have that spaced, then I can come back and sew across just like the other side, and then pull it right side out again. Okay, so here she is. Both sides are sewn. Now hopefully I can just turn it right side out now and have that whole part encased. Yay, it's always nice when things work out. Okay, so this is my inside lining, and now those seam allowances are covered, so that's nice. So here it is from the front. Now, for the for the skirt parts, what I'm going to be doing is cutting a pattern piece of the, what is it? It's a front, a back, and a side. And so I'm going to cut that complete set out in my lining fabric. All right, so finally, I am back to the phase where I am going to sew the front skirt onto this bodice. So the front skirt, as you remember way back, I have serged all the way around it and ran my gathering stitches with my super strong bobbin thread here. So I'm going to go ahead and pin that, matching my edges and my center. They usually don't tell you to mark your center front on these things, but do it anyway. Always a good idea. But I'm going to match all that, pull my gathering threads, get it set in place, and run a 5/8 inch seam straight across. This is the inside, and this is the front skirt that's sewn on. And again, it will be lined later, but right now we're just going to leave it as is. The next thing I'm going to be doing is the back. You know, my label's on the back, so I know what it is. I'm going to be putting the back panel here. Now, the back panel is not gathered. It's just put on flat, so that's a lot easier. Okay, so piece number 7 here is my back panel, and again I am going to take this peach version and serge all the way around it and come back and pin it onto my top. Okay, so I have the back skirt pinned onto the back of the lacy neckline area, and I'm going to do a straight 5/8 inch seam allowance and sew across there. So actually at this point I need to go ahead and do a little bit of work on the lining of the front and the back pieces. We're not messing with the side quite yet. So first thing I'm going to do is serge around. These are big pieces that are cut on a fold. So I'm going to serge around each piece and then going to go back and attach the top to the dress. Okay, so here is my lining piece. I've serged all around it, and this is for my back. And this is the one that I've sewn on for the front skirt piece. This is my neckband. You can see the label. And I'm just going to sandwich this part with my skirt pieces. So I'm putting the lining one in here, and the skirt one is already sewn on, but it's on the outside. And I will use a slightly smaller seam allowance sewing this lining on just to make sure I don't hit this one, because that's the pretty one. I want to make sure it stays nice. So I'll probably use, probably about a 1/2 inch or a little bit less sewing this one on here. So this is what it looks like now. I don't have it closed in on the sides. I just wanted to make sure I had this top sewn. So what I need to do now is sew the front lining to the front here. Okay, so this is my front. First I'm going to serge all the way around my front piece. Again, it's on a fold. And once I do that, I will be, just like the other one, sandwiching this piece here with it. So there's a gathered side on this side for my skirt front. And then it's like this lace part here, this band. And I'm going to, kind of like I did with this, where it's not really gathered, it's more like purposely spaced pleating, I guess you would call it, and do that across here. Alrighty, so new day, and I want to show you where we are right now. This is the front so far. We don't have any side here. The side panel is not here. But from the inside, you can see here's the lining in that top part, and then there's the lining in the bottom, and it's just open. It's just hanging by this seam up here, okay? And the same with the back. It's just sewn across the top, so, and this doesn't have any pleats or gathers or anything. It's just nice and straight. So there's the top and there's the lining. So the way that the construction on this dress works is before we put the side panels in, we're going to do these sleeves, and it's this big, well, kind of like this. It's a big sleeve. So let's look at it. So there's a lot of markings on here. Nothing really down here. It's all across here. So as always, I use my hole punch in my leather backing and punch my holes on my pattern. Now there's the center, of course, which we lined up with the top, and then there's these small dots. And all of the gathering and easing is between these small dots in the center. Then there's a bigger dot, and I think that's just for placement. And then there's another small dot here. And from this small dot down, it's not sewed together. It's, so you can see this right here. It's actually hemmed. So we've got where it's gathered, where it's sewn regular, and then this opening part at the very bottom where it's actually hemmed up and loose. So that's fun. So make sure you mark everything and keep track of it. I'm actually going to go ahead and make little lines for my notches, just because I am using a very sheer fabric and it would be easy to lose that little slice in here. So this is my overlock machine, and I was thinking what a perfect time to use the rolled hem function of a serger to show how to hem something like this fabulously with a tiny rolled hem. And then I realized I haven't used my rolled hem plate in forever. I mean, literally a decade. So I hunted around. This is the old one, the regular foot. I found it. It basically looks like this, but instead of this wide part, it has a needle stuck in there. So it's a tiny thing to go around. And then I realized why I hadn't used it in years is because I had my needle, I had been using only the wide setting, and I haven't moved this. It needs to be over there. But I had only been using it as a 3 thread for a long time, but with the needle out here. So if you have a 4 thread, that means that you've got an upper and a lower looper, and you have 2 different needles you can use. And you cannot use a rolled hem foot with the wide needle. It just won't work. It'll just get wrapped around the plate. So then I had to change needles, you know, which meant I had to find my little bitty screwdriver, which would fit those, which then meant I had to undo some things and find the special serger needles and all of that. But after 20 minutes, it's done and it's ready to go. So I have a love-hate relationship with overlock machines. So if you are going to be doing this, and this is how it looks when you're done, going around a curve on something this light, you're going to need to guide it both from the back and the front. So giving it enough guidance from the front, but also pulling it from the back just slightly. Because if you don't guide it out the back, it's going to tend to want to bunch up a bit, and then your stitches are going to get bunchy, and it's just going to be bad. So take your time. And since this was intended to be hemmed, I am slicing out about 1/4 inch. Usually when I'm just finished serging around the edge of a piece just to keep it from fraying, I try not to cut off anything. But using a rolled hem for the purpose of hemming is a little bit different. That's how it's going to look. And for a little sundress, I think that's going to be fine. So I have the hem done, so I'm going to put my regular plate back on, but just so you can see the difference, this is the one for the rolled hem, and it just has a tiny little needle right there. And this is my regular one, and you can see how it has a wider finger right there. It's to get a wider, flatter stitch, whereas this is a tiny little rolled stitch. So I'm going to put this one back on and serge across the flat part of that sleeve. Okay, so I want to show you what's going on right now. This is the edge of my sleeve, and you can see it has a little bit of ruffling on it, serging on a bias, things like that. Okay, if this really bothered me, I could, with my steam iron, very carefully, you know, steam is the thing that's going to make the threads go back, press it out. So it's just a matter of being patient and pressing it down. And that would work. You just need to take your time, make it flat, and the threads would work themselves back together, and you'd have a nice smooth edge. Could do that, and it looks like I actually am doing that. But it wouldn't bother me to leave it as is, because this is a very, you know, light-hearted 70s vintagey type of a pattern, and the little ruffles might not be a bad thing, but at this point I've flattened them, so I'm going to go ahead and finish flattening them. Now there's, like I said, several dots. The first dot is about 3 inches from the edge. Let's see if I can tip this down. Here's the first dot here, and they're going to want you to clip to that dot, but reinforce it. And my fabric is so lightweight, I am not going to stay stitch on here. I'm going to use my tape. So the tape that I'm using is this. Now here's something, you know, this is expensive. I 100% agree. But there are options if you don't want to use it. So a alternative to using this stay tape, you know, which I love, but is expensive. And actually it would make sense to do my alternative method on a sheer fabric because it could show through. And sometimes when you're using a fabric that's fairly sheer, that can be a problem. So here's what you do. You get your fabric you cut it from, and you're going to cut your selvage edge, however long you want. I'm going to need about 1 foot of it because I have 3 inches on each side of each sleeve. So just a rough idea here. Yeah, that's plenty. All right. So I just have it roughly cut here. I'm actually going to come in and trim it a little bit nicer because I don't want all of these little hairy edges, and I want to make sure that I have it trimmed exactly here. I want to make sure I have it trimmed exactly to where that selvage starts. So I don't know if you can see, there's a difference in the fabric. It's a little denser, it's harsher and everything, so I'm going to retrim this. Okay, so now I have my little selvage strip and I have it cut into the 4 pieces that I'm going to be using. Now you could machine stitch this on. 100% there's nothing that would be wrong with that. But I am actually going to fuse it on. And let me get my little fusible tape here. And I'm using a fusible tape. It's a Stitch Witchery type tape. Mine is, it's cut to 1/2 inch, so it makes it handy for this. But I'm just going to tear off a piece that's about that length. Put it over this. Center it over the dot that I'm going to want to reinforce. Just on the inside. I really only want this on the seam allowance side. I don't want it on the fabric side. So I'm putting it in the seam allowance area, but with the center being where my dot is. And actually, because I have so much sheerness and fusibleness going on, I am going to use my little press cloth over this. And just press it on. And this selvage, it won't stretch. It won't stretch, so that's a good alternative. And all of a sudden, I have a fusible seam tape that is exactly the shade of my sheer fabric, and it's going to hold and it's going to be fabulous. So now, unfortunately, it made my dot disappear, but I can redraw my dot. That's not a big deal. But you can use this for just about any fabric. I mean, not the super bulky things, but just about any fabric that's a regular garment type fabric can be self-faced that way. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and do this to the other dots that need to be reinforced, and I'll be right back. Okay, with all of that done, now I'm going to come, and I've marked a B on my back because that's how I roll. I'm clipping it to that circle, the one that we just reinforced up to, and this part here is what I'm going to hem. So if I turn that in and then turn it in again on itself, I can make a really nice, about a 1/4 inch hem. Straight down there, I'm just going to machine stitch that on all 4 pieces. So on both sides of each sleeve, this is what you do. All right, so the next thing I need to do is it wants us to gather between these 2 dots and the center one to match this size here. And I'm going to do this way a little bit different than normal because I can. And what I'm going to be using is my clear elastic. This is about a 1/4 inch. Honestly, this would work better if it was about 3/8 of an inch wide, but it's fine. And what I do is I'm putting it over the space that I want to gather. And I'm letting it stick out about 1 inch or more on each side, just because that's going to make it easier to hold. Then with a Sharpie, and hopefully one that's similar to the fabric you're sewing, doesn't have to be exact, but you know, I put a little dot on that elastic where those dots are. So I don't know, can we see that? Here's my elastic, and those are the little dots that I've marked. Okay, so what I do then, let me make sure this is dry, not going to come off. Okay, then what I do is over at the sewing machine with a zigzag, I will place the first dot over, actually in the seam allowance, and where I have it serged, I'm doing it just inside the serging, but level with that dot. I'll lock it in place with a stitch, always end with the needle down, and the extra that is out here so I can hold on to it easier, and then stretch this to the center dot and stitch down it. When I get there, I'll let that go and stretch it again so I have this equal to the center dot but closer to the seam allowance. Do that one and lock it in at the very end. And this stuff, it will always bounce back to its original size, so it's miracle elastic. This one I just did, so you can see it's going to go ahead and make it match perfectly. And that way, something that's sheer like this, I don't have to worry about a lot of strings and everything hanging off. and it does have a little bit of give if I need, but it will come back. Okay, so I'm just going to get it started here. Just go forward and backwards a couple stitches. And like I said, I have it medium wide zigzag, and just a medium-sized stitch, nothing huge and nothing tiny. Now here's my mark, and I'm going to, put my needle down before I stretch anything. Stretch that dot equal with the center dot. Okay. Now if this is too wide here to hold, you can grab it halfway, which I'm going to do. Okay, I'm at the last dot, back and forth a couple times, and pull it off. And there you go. It is all perfectly gathered. That elastic is clear. It just disappears. And now this is ready to sew onto the sleeve, onto the dress. We've got a lot of things to match up here. So first thing I'm going to do is make sure that I get my side with my B on it for back, and I put it in the back. And there's a dot on this back part here, and that dot, so I'm lining up my lining piece with the top, that dot matches up with this point here where we clipped to and did the little hem. So I'm going to pin that. We also have notches, so I'm pinning those notches. And I'm just going to come over here, try to lay it out. Now this point here where this seam is, where this little hem is, that matches up with this seam here where the ruching starts. So I'm going to line that up and pin that. Okay, so now where I have my 3 dots here, I made a line on my center one just because it's easier for me to see that that is the center of my sleeve. So I'm going to line up that dot too. And the others. Now here's the thing. I've got my little dot here all matched up nicely, but because we've been doing so much sewing with all of these panels, if it looks like you've got a little bit of a gap right here, don't worry about it. What you do is as you sew, when you're sewing it, you get a little straight pin and just kind of work it in as you go, especially if you do it up in this part, like say, I have a little thread. Like say that you're sewing along and you get up here close to where our elastic gathers are, and you can see you're going to need more room. What I would suggest is just, there's another dot here. That gets close to where this seam is here, where the band is. Okay, but anyway. So it looks like I have about, what, 1/2 inch extra here. Just with this little pin, every time I take a step, I'll just push it a little bit closer to that presser foot, and it's just going to work that extra fullness in, and it'll be just fine. But do it up here. Don't do it down here because that might look strange, but where there's other fullness gathers, just work it in that way. So I'm going to go ahead, pin this on, work it in. And when it's all done, this side I've already finished, and I think it looks really pretty. After you've sewn it, you're going to press the seam allowance towards the band, okay? So it doesn't show out here. Okay, so this is what we've got so far. So pretend that she's attached here. But the sleeves are going to look really pretty. So they have like this opening here, and then the rest just kind of hangs ethereally. So that's pretty. That's pretty. I think it's going to work. So now it's time to get on the side pieces. So the next thing is to put interfacing on this facing piece. And I am using an extremely light fusible interfacing. Okay. The point of this for me is that I want to make sure that these pieces don't stretch at all because, you know, it's on a curve. I don't want this piece to be stiff. I don't want it to appear any different in texture than the rest of the dress. I just want it to hold its shape. And that's what this very light fusible interfacing should do for me. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the ironing board and apply it. So usually I just use a hot steam iron straight onto this, but one, it's polyester, so I don't want to hold a hot steam iron on it too long, but I do want the moisture and I do want to be able to put the pressure. So what I'm doing is, here, let me tip this up. Okay. So what I'm doing is my spray bottle, getting my muslin scrap press cloth damp, and I'm just going to set that. I have my interfacing placed over my pieces here. There you go. I'm just going to place this damp press cloth on top of it, trying to make sure I don't move those pieces. And now I'm going to iron it with my iron, and I can hold it there, and the moisture from the cloth is going to help activate those little fusible dots, and I'm able to use the heat that I need and press it on. Okay. So now if I tug it a little bit, yeah, that's on there really good. I'm going to go ahead and flip them over right side up, put my press cloth back on, and just give them one more little hit with my iron, just to make sure that there's nothing on this side that's lacking. And then I think they are ready to go. Okay, so now with the side pieces, I have 2 of lining and 2 of fabric. You might not have lining, that's fine. What I'm going to do is serge around each of the pieces and transfer the markings. There's 2 dots. They look like princess seam type marking dots here, and a couple notches and dots up here, so lots of dots. These up here match up with the facing piece. So, but the first thing I need to do is just serge around the outside edge of these individually. Alright, so this is what I have. I don't have it serged at the top here because that's going to be in the casing or the facing, but I've serged all the way around both. So I'm layering my lining on the bottom, my fabric on top, and I'm going to be marking on my fabric. So I have a lot of little circles to put in. I think technically they're called match points, but they're circles. And I have notches that, again, I'm drawing on with my pen, just because. So here is this side. Now I'm going to take my facing piece, and I have my notches on my facing that I'm matching up here. I'm going to pin that up, and I am going to stitch it through. Now, here's the thing. I'm going to be doing this slightly different. If you did not have a lining, you could go all the way across. I am just going to this dot here, and on this dot, I'm also going to be stopping at 5/8 of an inch because I want to do something different because of my lining. But if you don't have it, you can just go all the way straight across. So I'm going to do this on both of the pieces, the right side and the left side. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to do is trim this to within about 1/4 inch of my stitching, and I'm going to be understitching it then. So now I'm going to press this seam allowance towards the facing, and I'm going to come back and understitch this seam, which means that this on this side, on the facing side, coming right along here, about 1/8 of an inch in from this stitching line, I'm going to be running a row of stitching, and that's going to hold the facing, this seam allowance, up against the facing, so that then when you turn it, it's going to roll over nicely. So it's understitched now, so this is what it looks like, but then when you turn it, you can see that it makes a really nice roll up here, and nothing's going to be peeking out, and so from the outside you just see a nice edge. You don't see any of this kind of stuff. So that's what we want. I'm going to give it a quick press across the top just to hold it in place. Okay, so the next part they want us to focus on is the belt. There's these ties that go and tie behind you. Now, they have a very, very long piece, which I am not making it the full length. From the picture, it looks like there's enough length to do a big old bow behind you and all this other stuff. I don't want that. I just want a simple tie. So I only cut one piece instead of two, and I cut my piece, probably about 10 inches shorter than the pattern, maybe a little more. So instead of folding it and sewing around and turning it like the instructions say, I am actually going to take my one piece and cut it in half where the fold line is, and just do a narrow hem along both edges, just because I didn't want the thickness of a doubled belt on this dress. So I just went ahead and did the rolled edge on my serger for these. Since I already had it out and did part of the dress, it would work for the other part. And on your front side, here's my side piece here. Oops, sorry. Okay, here is my side piece here, and there are 2 dots right here, and this tie is going to get centered there. Oh, probably if I had hemmed it correctly, it would fit perfectly between the dots, but mine's just going to overlap it just a little bit. Now, I am going to be sewing this just to the dress itself, not to the lining. If you don't have a lining, don't worry about it. Okay, so I'm just going to sew this straight across here, and I'm going to do it slightly less than 5/8, probably closer to a 1/2 inch. That way, when I come back and do the whole thing, I can make sure to not have that seam exposed. All right, I've got this side pinned together, and it can be a little bit tricky, so I want to walk you through it. First of all, where this sash is, it's going to match up with the location where this midriff space is. So I'd start pinning there to match that up. Now, if you don't have a lining, it'll be a whole lot easier. Just do it like the directions say, and when you get up here, the facing will be folded down, and you're just going to stitch down. Now, above this spot, you just kind of pin it rounding around that bodice bust area, and you're going to come up, and for me, I am going to stop stitching right here because I have my lining. But do you remember when we're placing the sleeve and it seemed like there was an extra dot right here for no apparent reason? Well, this is the reason, because that's the point where this side piece is supposed to match up with your sleeve. So if you get up here and you have that dot on your sleeve, those two are going to match up, hopefully. So anyway, after all that, coming down here, at the point where my skirt bottom is, if you're doing a lining, make sure you pick out enough stitches that's holding your lining in, when you run your row of stitching, it's not going to catch it. And so I just pulled out maybe 1 inch of those stitches and pinned it back here just so it's out of the way. And the same thing when you're working with your sleeve. Your sleeve's going to be flopping around in here. Just pay attention that it's not getting stuck in here at all when you're sewing. So just kind of a lot of things to be aware of as you make this one seam all the way down. And then when you're all done, do the other side the same way. Okay, so having these stitched, what I'm going to do next is come back and press these seams open all the way up on both sides of this front. So before I move on to the attaching the back piece to the side, I want to show you a few steps here. So this is the seam we just did. This is the side, this is the sash, lining up approximately here. My sash was a little bit longer, so the bottom lines up, the top's a little high, but you know, c'est la vie. So this is all matched up, it's all sewn, and I want to show you what I'm doing inside here. Okay, so this is inside out now. This is the seam that was just sewed. Now I'm taking this lining that was the front lining here and raising it up over the head, okay? In the back, the lining's up higher, and I'm raising it up over the head. So I have them both up here, okay? So now what I'm going to do is, starting at the bottom, I'm going to match these two seams together, and one side is much shorter than the other, all right? So don't get stressed about that. It's just the way it is. And I'm going to pin this up until I get to the top of the shorter piece, which is right here. And I'm going to go ahead. This is that seam allowance that I said pick it back enough that you're not going to stitch it. Okay, that's what this is. So I'm going to sew this from this point down at a 5/8 inch allowance on both sides, and then press these allowances open. Okay, I know earlier I said to, after you sew this seam here on the main fabric, to press it open. I'm changing that. Push it towards the back, because here's my lining. Okay, so here's my lining. This is the seam we just sewed here. All right, so this is the inside. And if I can press these seam allowances towards the back, they'll be completely encased here. And I think that looks a lot nicer. So then what I'm going to do is just fold and pin this over. And that's going to keep it a lot nicer there. Oops, I think I'm pinning something underneath. All right, now up here where this facing is, there we are. It's the same thing. What I'm going to do is actually clip this right here, just below that facing, and tuck that whole part in. This part from this point up into the sleeve area will still remain there, but this part below it I'm tucking in, folding this down and tucking it in, so that then I can come down here and pin it on. Oh, looks like I need to shift a little thing here, but you get the idea. It's to give me a really nice clean edge on the inside here, so I don't have any of that other stuff showing. So let me adjust this. So that's what it's going to look like on the inside. Here is the front, okay? This is machine sewn. From here down it's machine sewn. I'll probably just come back in and whip stitch this little part because it's not that long. It's only maybe about 10 inches long. And that'll get that completely encased. No raw edges showing, which you know I love. And then do that to both sides of the front. And then we'll get on to the back pieces. Alright, so the front is done, everything's whip stitched down. The back is actually going to be a lot easier. So I am starting with the fashion fabric again, and I will do the lining part separate, just because I want to make sure that this is smooth. So what I'm going to do is just match up the side seams, match up the bottoms, and then up at the top, the place that it comes together is, so here is my facing for my center, and or my side I should say, and here is that little spot right underneath the sleeve. Here's the sleeve that we want to make sure stays out of the way, and at that level where all of those things come together, that's where they're going to meet. So I'm going to very carefully pin that so that the sleeve does not get caught in there. And I am going to be sewing it from right underneath. Got to keep my lining out of the way. All right. So I'm going to be sewing it from right underneath here, which is right underneath the facing. The facing, if you can see, there's like a little level change right here. right there, there's a little step down. That's where the facing starts. So I'm going to go from there all the way down to the end. And I'm going to do that on both sides and press these open. I guarantee I'm going to press these open. Alrighty, so this is the back seam here. It was just done, and you can see I've pressed it open. So now I'm ready to sew the lining for this back area. And what I want to do is sew the facing at the same time, this little slip here. So I'm going to just kind of push this stuff here out of the way. Push it down out of the way so we don't grab that. And bring these up and very carefully, strategically folding these up here so everything's going to meet. See how this fold here and this fold here and this facing, that's what I want to meet. Just those three pieces, the two lining pieces and that facing. All that other stuff, I'm just pushing down to get out of my way for right now. Okay, so I'm not going to start stitching right up top because right here, because there's a chance I'm going to catch some of that stuff I'm pushing out of the way. So I'm actually probably going to start stitching about 1/2 inch in, which is fine. This is the lining. It's not the main part, and the main part is sewed all the way to the top, so that's okay. So I have these two pinned, and I'm going to continue all the way down to the bottom. Okay, so I'm going to make this seam here at 5/8 of an inch, and then I'm going to press it open. Up here at the top, there's going to be a place where I'm going to need to make one clip just so I can press it all open, but other than that it should go together really easily. Alright, so this is sewn, it's pressed open, and I want to show you this little part here. This is where the sleeve is sewn on, okay, and I need all that to be out, but I want the rest of it to tuck in. So I am going to make a little clip right here so that this can get tucked in to that little, remember I said there's like 1/2 inch that I'm not sewing, so that got tucked in there, and then all of this that's part of that seam allowance for that sleeve can be free because we're going to be dealing with that later. So I'm just going to put a couple stitches in this like top 1/2 inch on both sides right at this point. Okay, I want to show you what it looks like so far. It's actually, I know it's supposed to be 70s, but done up in this fabric in this way, it kind of reminds me of an Edwardian type, you know, because this looks like an empire type top and everything, and the shirring and all. It just kind of gives that vibe to me, which is nice. I love that. So anyway, it's coming together great. This is, when you see the inside lining, you don't see any seams, allowances, or anything. That's all closed up. The back, you know, I said that I put a shorter tie on it, so it's just a little tie that hangs like that. I didn't want big bows, you know, that's good enough for me. So there's just a few things more to do. We need to come inside here and clean up around the inside of these sleeves. They want us to do some special finishing work for inside in these seam allowances, and then there's the hemming. So close. Alright, so what they want us to do is clean up and take bulk out of these sleeves, the tops of them here, and make it nicely attached to the band of the dress. So they ask for either bias tape or stretch lace, and I just happen to have, amazingly, some pink stretch lace that I think will work pretty well. So what I need to do is, you can see the seam here that I used to sew on the sleeve. I'm going to put my stretch lace just next to it, just inside of it. I'll probably leave a gap of a little less than 1/8 of an inch between the edge of my stretch lace and that seam. And I'm going to pin that all the way around and come back and in that little track on the edge of the stretch lace, you know, it's this way on both sides. I'm going to do a straight stitch all the way down. And I'm going to do this on both of the seam allowances. This is just the seam allowance we're sewing. You know, pull everything else away so you're not touching the actual sleeve or the band up there. Okay, so I have my lace sewn on, just that one part. I'm going to fold it back, come in here and trim. So there's between 1/8 and 1/4 inch of all of this stuff underneath sticking out. And when you get up into the ruffling and everything up here, that's going to make quite a big difference. So very carefully, coming back on the inside and trimming out. All right, so I've trimmed it and put the lace down, and I've just pinned it in place. And so now what I need to do is come back by hand and whip stitch this edge down. And I just folded it in on the bottom. So I'm going to whip stitch it so it doesn't go all the way through, so it's not obvious on this side, all the way around both of the sleeve tops. And that's going to actually give it a really nice finish, so you don't have to worry about that seam allowance poking out where it's not supposed to be. So I did just a real quick try on. It's going to be cute, but very long on me. And so I'm going to actually want my hem to fall right here. And that's 5 inches from the end. So what I'm going to be doing is from the fabric, cut off 3 inches. And that'll give me 2 inches to do a turn down and a hem. All right, so we're finally time to hem here. And since we are doing a 1970s pattern, I am going to hem it with lace from 1976. Isn't that great? So back when it was 45 cents a pack. So the one thing that I want to do before I stitch my lace on is I have this cut. I cut 3 inches off of the length that I had there, and I'm going to be, a 2-inch hem feels a little bit tall, but that's what we're going to go with. We're going to go with a 2-inch hem, but I have so many seams, and it seems like there's a lot of bulk in this seam allowance here. So I'm going to trim some of that down. So what I'm going to do is, because it's a 2-inch hem, at the 2-inch point down here, and at every other seam, actually, I'm going to mark it with my little pen just so I can make sure I get the right one. What I'm going to do is come in here and trim off that serging and kind of put it at an angle so it's not a hard end, but having it narrow at the point where I fold and coming up is going to reduce some of that bulk so that when I do my hem, it's not nearly as thick right there. And that's one of the things I was thinking of, is this fabric is going to show every little stitch. And I don't want to do a machine sewn stitch. I want to do actually a hand sewn. So what I'm going to do is sew the lace on by machine and then come back and sew the top part of the lace by hand. But we'll just take it a step at a time. First things first is going all the way around, and at each one of these seams, I'm going to be at my 2, and I'm marking it at 2 inches because I want to make sure that's where my fold is. I for sure want to make sure that the thickness is taken out at my fold. So I'm just going to be doing this all the way up. Okay, so with all of these trimmed, now I'm flipping it over, looking at the right side, and I'm going to hem it with my stretch lace. And there is a very slight curve to this skirt. Not a whole lot, but there is some. So I will be, putting just a very tiny amount of stretch into this lace as I sew it on. But I sew it so that the edge of the fabric is about halfway up my lace. Okay, so there's a close-up of the lace. So you can see there's like a straight part on each side, and I'm just going to use a straight stitch in that little alleyway there and sew it on all the way around. So I have my lace sewed on, and I'm just turning it up so that it's at the hem, the finished sized hem that I want, and I am pressing it so that I can get that crease started, and just pinning it. Because I am going to come back and stitch this by hand, I'm going to put pins like every 6 inches all the way around. Once I have this pinned, then I'm going to put this whole thing on my dress form and see what length I need to cut the lining so that it'll be appropriate with this hem length. Alrighty, so this is what the bottom of the skirt looks like right now. I have my hem just pinned up here. It's not actually stitched yet. I wanted to look at it on my dress form before I stitched it. And I am at a dilemma because I haven't stitched it yet on purpose in case I needed to change something. But here's something that's interesting to me. It has this, tip you up. It has this tie in the back here, okay? And we know that it's only staying perfect because she's perfectly still. But as soon as you start moving around and things like that, it's gonna pooch. Kind of like that when you're wearing it, all right? So, with that being the case, coming down here, when it's all pooched up there, that would put the back of this skirt slightly higher than the front. So my question to myself right now is, do I change my hem length, like lowering it in the back here, so that when this is on, the tie is going on up there, it's actually going to be level down here. And I do think that that's what I'm going to do. I probably should have done this before I sewed the lace on, but it's not a big deal. I can fix that. So what I'm going to do here is, assuming that the length at this front seam is fine, is where I want it, because that's where the tie is attached, okay? So what I'm going to do is get my little hem marker, and at some point I need to lower this dress form because she is so tall. The hem marker is having a fit. It doesn't want to go that tall. Okay, but at this point, right there, where the pin mark is the very edge of that skirt, okay? So what I need to do is pull these pins out, and I'll start in the very back because then it'll be easier to work my way around. There is not a seam in the middle of the back, but we can just judge, we can do that. So where this pin mark is, that's where the bottom needs to be. And that is just barely above where that lace is. That's cute, huh? So it should gradually work its way higher and higher until we get to that other point. So when the dress is just hanging up, it's going to look kind of like a high-low style hem. But as soon as you put it on and tie the belt on it, it's going to, excuse me, it's going to fix itself. So I'm getting close to where I started, and all of a sudden I'm back at the length, the length where the crease is. So you can see as I go towards the back, at this side, where the side is sewn onto the back piece, I'm about halfway. And when I get to the very back, I'm just above the lace level. So to keep it consistent, what I'm going to be doing is obviously pressing this crease out of here because we don't want that anymore. Repositioning the lace so that it is at the same level all the way around, and then coming back and dealing with the lining. I'm going to make the lining, whatever this finished length ends up being at whatever point it is on the dress, I'm going to be cutting the lining approximately 2 inches shorter than what that finished length is, and then I will be serging around it and running just a narrow piece of lace around the bottom of that lining just because I can. So anyhow, that's what we're doing. Alrighty, so I have my edge cut so that I have about 1/2 inch below. Like say this is where the edge needs to be. I have everything about 1/2 inch below, which is not very big for a hem. So instead of the narrow one, we're going to be using this wide hem tape, but staying with the whole program. This one is from 1971, so we're still good. So I'm going to be using this wide tape. Similar concept where I'm sewing it onto the edge, except the thing is that when I go to fold it up, then I have a nice tall hem so that when I go to hand stitch it up here, it'll still give me the effect of a wider hem. So that's what I'm going to do right now, is go back to my sewing machine, and from the right side of the fabric, I'm going to be sewing this just so that the fabric just barely hits the top of this outside bumpy edge. And I'm just going to do a straight stitch. You can kind of see there's a line right there, and I'm going to be sewing down that line. Alright, so I have it sewn on. I have pressed the edge, and now I'm hand stitching it. Now, the optimal spacing for hand stitching is 3/8 of an inch apart for each stitch. That way there's enough to keep it from falling, but not so much that it's gonna be ugly or obvious or whatever. And amazingly enough, as if they had it planned, these little bumps on the top of hem lace are exactly 3/8 of an inch. So I can just gauge by making a stitch at the top of every one of those loops, trying just to catch 1 or 2 threads from the bottom, and just hitting it that way. And that way I know exactly how I should place it. So what started out as to be a quick little fun project, like I usually do, it gets a lot more involved. But you know what? Yeah, I have William. But you know what? I think that having lined the whole thing, it actually feels a lot more safe and a lot more substantial to me. If you're starting out this dress and you don't want to line it, just make sure that it's opaque enough or thick enough or textured enough or whatever that you're going to feel comfortable in it, because without the lining it would have gone together a lot faster. But you know, learn a new technique. So there you go. And the little thing that I did with the elastic on the gathering for the sleeves, it's a great trick. Now it only works really on smaller sections and lighter weight fabrics. If you try to do it on something large, like a gathered skirt or something, it's not going to work. Stop it, cat. Because it just doesn't have enough oomph. But for something like this that you don't want a bunch of extra stitches going through, because I didn't want to risk, you know, marring this, which would be very obvious, it would work great. And the thing with making your own stabilizing tape using the selvage edge of whatever fabric you're using can be really handy, like with the sheer thing that you want to make sure that it matches, plus just a cost-effective thing, you know. I 100% understand that So Easy stuff, that tape, it is expensive. I pay, I think it's like $11 or $12 a roll by the time I pay shipping and everything to get it here. So I like the product. I think it's very handy, but if you can find an alternative and you have it handy, that's great. And by using the stitch witchery, you can make self-matching tape for anything, honestly, except for like really heavy, bulky things, you know, like coat type of fabrics or upholstery type fabrics, you know, obviously no, but you can still find a coordinating lining that would work. So anyhow, the dress itself is comfortable. I'm actually supposed to be going out with a girlfriend for coffee later, and I'm just going to wear this into town, you know. It almost has that Easter dress vibe to it, but at the same time, why not? It's a sunny day. I am celebrating because it's finally warm enough to wear something like this outside, and I'm just going to celebrate. So I hope that you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching. Bye-bye.